Welcome to the Daily Plunge. We are in the book of Psalms, Psalm 78. It's the second longest psalm in the book, and a big chunk of it, most of it, is really about the Exodus and the wilderness experience. And it starts off where he says, you need to hear my teaching. And the word there is Torah, right? It is hear the word of God, both the law and the gospel. And he says, we're going to tell our kids the testimony of Jacob. He says, and how God established, it says the law, maybe in your translation. It's, again, the word there is Torah in Israel. He established the word of God, the law and the gospel in Israel. And we're going to tell our kids this so that our next generation and the generation after that will know the Lord and trust the Lord. And that's one of the most important things parents can do, is to pass on the faith. And why? Because we don't want our kids to be stubborn and rebellious and unfaithful. Don't be like those guys from Ephraim. Now, Ephraim is a reference to the northern kingdom of Israel, and because Ephraim was one of the main tribes. And he talks about how they forgot all the things that God had done. Well, what were the things that God had done? Well, he did miracles in their sight, and he divided the sea, and he guided them with a cloud of smoke and fire. He split rocks, gave them water. He brought streams out of rocky crag. He did all these things, and yet they continued to sin. And not only that, they put God to the test. And they said, can God really take care of us? And what's interesting is that we talk first about the wilderness, and then we're going to talk about the work against Egypt. And so, can God really spread a table in front of us? And he talks about how God provided water and provided meat and took care of them, and yet they didn't believe God, even though he rained down manna from heaven. And yet how also, because of their testing of God, how they suffered God's anger. And so as he's dealing with them, and they finally wake up, and it says, in spite of all this, they kept on sinning. In spite of all his wonders, they did not believe, and he was ending their days in futility. And they finally remembered, oh yeah, God's our rock. He's our redeemer. And yet he says that they would flatter the Lord with their mouths and lie to him with their tongues. And so it was just a surface level worship. They weren't turning their hearts to God. And yet the Lord, verse 38, was merciful. He forgave them. He remembered that they were just flesh. But verse 40, how often they rebelled. Time and again, they put God to the test. Verse 42, because they did not remember he was God. They did not remember all his power. And they should have, because they saw it displayed in everything that he did with Egypt. And, Israel's incredible rebellion and disbelief and unbelief, in spite of what they saw God do. And it speaks about how God's wrath was unleashed on Egypt as an unrepentant enemy of God. And how he sent, as it says in verse 49, a band of destroying angels who carried out his plagues. And how he struck down the firstborn. And he talks about the first fruits of manhood in the tents of Ham. Ham is a reference to Egypt. And then God brought out his people like a flock. He guided them safely, drove out other nations before them. But again, they put God to the test. They rebelled, they were disloyal, they were faithless. And their idolatry angers God. And it's what he's trying to say is, be right with God like David was. Well, a lot to cover. Hey, thanks, friends. Read the whole psalm. Have a blessed day.